A day after storming of a Brazilian capital, over 1,500 supporters of former President Jair Bolsonaro have been detained by the authorities. As world leaders condemn the riots, President Lula da Silva has promised to bring those responsible to justice. Meanwhile, Bolsonaro has been admitted to a hospital in the U.S. state of Florida with abdominal pain. Bolsonaro also tweeted a picture of himself lying on the hospital bed. He was admitted to a hospital in Orlando with intestinal pains related to a stabbing he suffered during the 2018 election campaign. Meanwhile, the U.S. has said that it has not received any official request from the Brazilian government regarding the status of the former president after his supporters stormed Brazil's Congress. The U.S. State Department, however, said that an individual who no longer has a diplomatic visa should leave the country within 30 days. And Jair Bolsonaro flew to Florida 2 days before his term ended on January 1st and is believed to have entered on such a visa.
Leaving individuals aside, and generally speaking, if someone entered the United States on an A visa, which is essentially a diplomatic visa for foreign diplomats or heads of state, an A visa holder, if an A visa holder is no longer engaged in official business on behalf of their government, it is incumbent on that visa holder to depart the U.S. or to request a change to another immigration status within 30 days. That request for a change in visa status would be made to the Department of Homeland Security.
Meanwhile, in Brazil, thousands of pro-democracy protesters were seen on the streets of Sao Paulo to demand punishment for rioters. The protesters held signs reading "Democracy Forever."
Total absurdo. Nós, pós-ditadura de 64, o pior momento da nossa história. Eu acho que todo mundo ficou estarrecido com as imagens que vimos, né, no Congresso Nacional. Então, eu acho que a resposta é esta, foi bem dada, com essa Paulista toda ocupada. E é isso, a luta agora é para dar sustentação a esse governo que foi eleito democraticamente. E não vamos sair das ruas, esse é o recado.
On his Twitter handle, Bolsonaro still refers to himself as the president of Brazil. More on him and Brazil protests in our next report.
Brazilian police on Monday cleared an encampment set up by supporters of ousted right-wing former president Jair Bolsonaro, a day after thousands of rioters ransacked the presidential palace, the Congress, and the Supreme Court. The assaults marked the worst attack on the nation's governing institutions since Brazil's return to democracy in the 1980s. President Lula da Silva promised to bring those responsible to justice. Demonstrators shattered windows, demolished computers, and graffitied walls before police in riot gear retook the palace. On Monday, soldiers outside raised the flag, while inside, Lula held a cabinet meeting with his defense minister and commanders of the armed forces. Justice Minister Flavio Dino said 200 demonstrators had been arrested, although that number is expected to rise. U.S. President Joe Biden joined other world leaders in condemning Sunday's riots, calling them, quote, outrageous. Sunday's attacks recalled for many the assault on the U.S. Capitol 2 years ago by backers of former President Donald Trump. Dan Restrepo is with the Center for American Progress.
Unfortunately, it's a story that's quite familiar, certainly to Americans. You have a quasi-authoritarian right-wing former president who doesn't accept an election result, in this case, Jair Bolsonaro, who actually fled Brazil a couple of days before the inauguration on January 1st of President Lula da Silva. And today, his supporters tried a coup. They physically took over the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the Brazilian equivalent of the White House.
Lula blamed Bolsonaro for inflaming his supporters after a campaign of baseless allegations about election fraud after the end of his rule, marked by divisive nationalist populism. Bolsonaro denied inciting his supporters and said the rioters had, quote, crossed the line. He left Brazil shortly after he lost the election and has been living in Florida. A Brazilian newspaper on Monday reported the former president was hospitalized in the U.S. with abdominal pain. A source close to his family said Bolsonaro's condition was, quote, not worrying. At least one Democratic lawmaker is calling for the U.S. to expel the right-wing former president. Representative Joaquin Castro of Texas on Sunday told CNN, quote, the United States should not be a refuge for this authoritarian who has inspired domestic terrorism in Brazil. He should be sent back to Brazil. The White House on Monday said it had received no requests from the Brazilian government regarding Bolsonaro's status in the U.S.